This Sunday morning,
it has been the honor of my life to get elected to serve my state.
A spotlight on LGBTQ+ leaders for October's LGBTQ+ History Month.
I think it's really important to reflect on the progress that we've made.
Their accomplishments and concerns.
Other states are putting laws on the books that are actually targeting folks.
Ahead on NBC5 In Depth. Good Sunday morning, I'm Jack Thurston, and this is a Project Community episode of NBC5 In Depth, highlighting firsts in Vermont's LGBTQ+ community. October is LGBTQ+ History Month, which was started in the 1990s by an educator in Missouri. Whereas Pride Month in June is about visibility and the march toward equal rights, History Month is about recognizing the achievements of members of the LGBTQ+ community and ways they have shaped history. So that's what we're doing this morning with political leaders. Today, there are more voting members in Congress than ever before who identify as either lesbian, gay, or bisexual. According to the Pew Research Center, the number was 13 at the beginning of the year, 11 Democrats, 1 Independent, and 1 Republican. A 14th joined them when California Governor Gavin Newsom appointed out lesbian LaFonza Butler, a Democrat, to fill the seat of the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. One of those 14 is Democrat Becca Balint, the first openly gay person to serve Vermont in Congress and also the first woman to represent Vermont there. While she's quick to say she represents all Vermonters in her statewide district on issues like flood relief funding and strengthening family farms, Balint has been particularly forceful in her defense of transgender kids and their parents, insisting they deserve grace and not to be further marginalized. Around the country, many conservative lawmakers have called it child abuse for parents to seek gender-affirming care for their trans kids, or they've argued it's simply unfair to have trans girls participate in women's youth sports. Balint calls those attitudes cruel and promises to advocate for families of trans kids in a key House committee.
I'm also the only member of the LGBTQ community that is on the Judiciary Committee. And it's incredibly important to me right now to be there because so many of the rights that we have fought so hard to get are now at stake because of the extremist elements within the government that would have us strip away those rights from people like me. And so I'm here for all Vermonters from every corner of the state. I am here for the LGBTQ community. I'm here for Vermonters as Americans, that we need to get back to basic humanity and stop demonizing each other and dehumanizing each other. So I'm just so proud that I'm able to be in a position to do that.
Balint's views on ensuring access to medical care for trans kids are in line with groups including the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, all of which oppose government limits on transition-related care. Now, Balint was one of 2 openly LGBTQ+ leaders to win statewide election last year in Vermont. The other was Democrat Mike Pieciak, the state treasurer, who is gay. We asked him whether someone's sexual orientation should be a part of conversations around public service.
I think it matters because, when I was a kid growing up in Vermont, I didn't really think running for office might be something that was possible for me or being a leader in our state. I certainly had a great interest in public service. My parents set that example for me in Brattleboro. But I knew that I was different and that it would be really hard, to be in public service, to be a leader, to be in the spotlight. And that was a real challenge as a person growing up in Vermont. I think of leaders that led the way to make, that possible for me, quite frankly, from my opinion, like Bill Lippert, another, leader in the LGBTQ+ community. There were leaders from Brattleboro, there have been leaders from all over the state, and they really broke the barriers and made it something that seemed quite realistic that you could achieve. So I think it's really important to reflect on the progress that we've made to make sure that those young kids that are all through Vermont right now understand that they can grow up and be their authentic selves and be leaders and be successful here in our state. but also recognize that there's a whole host of other young people that maybe don't feel as represented in government now, even though we've made so much progress. So I think it's really important for that, to sort of celebrate the progress that we've made, but also to recognize that there's more work to be done. Nowadays, the challenges that transgender children face is much more significant than even just 5 or 10 years ago. The focus and the attention and the anger, they need to know that they're loved, that they can be authentic and successful people, and that they can do that here in Vermont.
When you were running for treasurer, you went to, I believe, each and every city and town in the state.
Yeah, they even created a town while I was running.
The city of Essex Junction.
Yes.
Now, that meant that you were going to reliably blue voting districts and reliably red voting districts. And I wonder, did you feel truly welcomed in every corner of Vermont?
Yeah, there wasn't, quite honestly, there was not a part of Vermont where I did not feel welcomed. I had an experience, and again, I credit this to the leaders that came before me. I had an experience where I thought it was quite welcoming. I didn't feel any hatred or vitriol about being gay. That wasn't an experience that I had in any corner of our state. And it really hasn't been an experience I've had in my professional career as well. I know not everyone is that fortunate, but I think it does speak to the acceptance that we have here in Vermont. Now, there were some challenging, conversations throughout, those 252 towns about identity politics and the ways that, that some people, view the world, and that's great. That's great dialogue, and to hear people's perspectives and to hear their point. But in the Northeast Kingdom, we were welcomed into people's living rooms just like we were in Brattleboro or Winooski. So I did feel, quite welcomed across the state.
Another sign of the kind of progress you were describing before. Now that you are state treasurer, I wanted to talk to you about possible disparities between members of the LGBTQ plus community and their straight cisgender neighbors. Advocates have said that LGBTQ plus people are more likely to experience poverty. They are less likely to, for example, have a 401k.
Yes.
I wonder if you've seen those same disparities here locally in Vermont.
Yeah, I mean, right here in Vermont, 27% of those in the LGBTQ plus community live in poverty. It's much higher than the median average. Twice as likely if you're LGBTQ plus to have food insecurity here in Vermont. So those are real tangible things that reports and studies have shown for Vermont. If you look at national data, it also suggests that LGBTQ plus members are twice as likely to have a credit score that makes them not a very good risk from a bank perspective when it comes to getting a mortgage or starting a business or even something like buying a car. And when you can't invest in those kind of wealth creation activities, buying a home, starting a business, making sure you have a car to get to your job, then it becomes really challenging to save for retirement, and to build up your assets. So we do see significant wealth disparities between those that are in the LGBT community and those that are not. One of the things that we did in the sort of first 10 months of being treasurer is pass a bill called Vermont Saves. And Vermont Saves is aiming to sort of solve for this problem of the about 88,000 to 100,000 Vermonters that don't have access to retirement, because part of the problem is simply not having access to it through your employer. So Vermont Saves would provide that access to that 88,000 individuals that work in Vermont who are not offered an employer-sponsored retirement plan. It's overrepresented female in that group. It's overrepresented BIPOC, LGBTQ+, lower income Vermonters. So it really will be a vehicle and an avenue for them to more easily start saving for their retirement, but also to start saving for an emergency that might come down the road as well.
I know it's early, but have you seen an encouraging amount of interest in the Vermont Saves program?
We have. I mean, just even through the legislative process, we were, I was really happy to see that we were able to get bipartisan support. And it actually did pass the House and the Senate unanimously and then signed by the governor. So that really, I think, showed the focus on this issue and the understanding that people had that we had to try to solve for this sort of retirement crisis that we're having, particularly for those that basically have nothing saved for retirement because they don't have a vehicle to do it. And then now that we are sort of out and talking about it, we just hired our executive director this week for the program. We've heard really good feedback from businesses that will be participating in it, businesses that say we're looking forward to this being set up because we want to offer this program to our employees, and they like the fact that it's not going to cost them any money also, that it's a program that's free to them. And we're hearing from individuals too that say they're excited to sign up and participate in it. So you know, we hope to get it up and running within the next 18 months, hopefully quicker if we can do it, but we think it will have a significant impact on this retirement crisis without having a big price tag because it's paid for by itself. It's paid for by the dollars that will be in the program.
And bipartisan unanimous votes are very, very rare, so that's interesting. Now, before you were a statewide office holder, you did serve in other roles in state government. You were in the Department of Financial Regulation. You're also an attorney.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could talk about LGBTQ plus representation in other institutions, whether it's higher education, law, or state government. How are we doing with representation?
Yeah, you know, I think Vermont has been doing well for a couple of decades, not just in politics, but in law. You think about the individuals that brought the civil union cases. A lot of them were in big law firms in Burlington, themselves part of the LGBTQ plus community. You think about higher education. We're also well represented there in the financial security, in the financial services industry. You know, there is representation, but I think across the board, everyone has recognized that we need to make sure we're doing more to encourage, you know, diversity in industries that maybe they're more traditionally male and more traditionally white, more traditionally straight than some other industries, to make sure people are represented and feel welcomed. But overall, you know, the Vermont economy, we're doing quite well in terms of leaders that are on their chambers of commerce, either locally or statewide, leaders of businesses. We had an event with the SBA and the Pride Center and some other organizations just in the last month, and the number of individuals that we were able to identify who are business leaders in the state who identify as being part of the LGBTQ plus community was quite significant and surprising when you see how many there are. So I think that's a good sign, and like I said, I think that representation is really important for younger people that are thinking about where they want to live their lives, whether they can do that in Vermont and be their authentic self, whether they can be successful here in Vermont. And seeing those examples from, you know, across our communities and across our economy is really important.
New history being made in LGBTQ History Month. All right, State Treasurer Mike Pieciak, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Still to come this morning, what Governor Scott has to say about making Vermont even more welcoming to LGBTQ plus people, and a conversation with another history-making leader, Taylor Small, Vermont's first openly transgender lawmaker. She joins us next on NBC5 In Depth. Welcome back. As we continue our Project Community observance of LGBTQ plus History Month, thoughts now from Vermont's top Republican. Governor Phil Scott tells NBC5 he wants to be a good ally to the community and hopes all Vermonters will strive for even more welcoming atmospheres, saying doing so could encourage young people and families to move here.
This is an opportunity for us to showcase our openness, our willing to be more tolerant of everyone, and I think it's a way for us to welcome more people in the state, which we desperately need. So any ideas out there that people have, I would encourage them to come forth and celebrate the month.
This year, the governor signed into law a package of health care measures often called shield laws. Among those protections, new guarantees that patients in Vermont can always receive gender-affirming care and that providers can practice in that area without interference from the state. One of the lawmakers who introduced the bill is Taylor Small of Winooski. She is Vermont's first and only openly transgender lawmaker.
The way I like to think of these shield laws is that it's protecting anyone who's in the state of Vermont. So it's like a firewall that goes around our borders, saying that in our state, reproductive health care and gender-affirming health care are protected, legally protected health care activities. and that if there is any litigation coming from other states or interference from other states in accessing these services, that we are going to protect the folks that are serving or are here right in the state of Vermont.
But now you say these shield laws may not go far enough in terms of protections?
Yeah, right now we are running into that collaboration with other states. So what we have seen is other states are putting laws on the books that are actually targeting folks that are providing these healthcare services. And so when we have that firewall, it's great that we're protecting folks that are in Vermont, but it's really hard for folks like young Vermonters who are going off to college in another state. When I think of gender-affirming care, I think of a longer-term relationship between the patient and provider. And so if that provider is continuing to give services and that trans youth happens to be in a hostile state, they are still open to that litigation based on the laws of that state. And so we're not able to protect that youth when they are in that other state. If they had litigation come in while they're there, we can't protect them. The way that we can protect them is that their provider does not have to collaborate, they do not have to provide evidence, and they do not have to testify. But only if that youth were back in the state of Vermont would we be able to protect them from that litigation to begin with.
So when the legislature reconvenes in January, will you be introducing legislation to strengthen the existing shield laws?
Absolutely, and I think it's a delicate balance that we need to make of respecting what it means to be a part of the union and collaborating with other states. So do we want to be the ones interfering? Absolutely not. But what we do want to make sure is that the folks that are here in Vermont and our Vermont residents, that they have the protections that they need to get basic health care, honestly.
What other bills might you be introducing next session that would pertain to the LGBTQ+ community? Perhaps work with students?
Students is a major area of focus, especially when we think of anti-discrimination. I think a lot of the conversation that we're hearing right now is about public education dollars going to public schools. And while I think that is something that we need to focus on, where I want to point to is how we are protecting our students. We are seeing increasing bias incidents, acts of violence in our schools, and students feeling more scared coming out of the pandemic to be able to fully engage in their education. And so while we were able to provide more robust protections for employees in the state of Vermont, and in particular thinking of teachers, I think we need to go that extra step to make sure that our students, regardless of whether they're in an independent school or a public school, have the protections that they need to feel safe to learn and thrive in their learning environment.
This is LGBTQ+ History Month, which is why we're doing this episode of In Depth. I wonder what role models you had as a young person that inspired you to pursue a career in public service?
You know, I think the first role model that comes to mind for me is Dana Kaplan, the executive director over at Outright Vermont. As a young queer youth, I had never met a trans person. I had never interacted with trans people. I actually can explicitly remember the first time that I was introduced to a trans person, and it was on the cover of Time magazine with Laverne Cox as the trans tipping point in 2012. And at that point, I was not necessarily questioning my gender identity, but definitely felt like there was something that I was not being authentic about. And so by being able to go and access the services at Outright, and in particular have a mentor who had lived experience as a trans person, and could show me that being trans also means that you can have a fulfilling, joyful leadership role in community, that was exactly what I needed to be able to come out to my friends and family and to be able to continue moving forward and understanding that leadership doesn't just stop there. And I would say the other one would be Representative Diana Gonzalez. When she called to highlight the work that I was doing in community and asked me to run, that was just the push that I needed, because that's not the story that we see of folks getting into office. We don't see young folks. We don't see people who are LGBTQ and in particular trans. And so I needed that external push to say, no, I see your leadership potential, to validate exactly what I was feeling on the inside.
And you have paid that forward because the city of Winooski, which you represent, made history in becoming the first city on the East Coast to have an all LGBTQ+ city council. And you recruited one of those city councilors to serve, Charles Judge.
I did. Our first trans city councilor as well. And I think there's an importance in having representation. What have we seen in the city of Winooski? Well, we've seen the beginning of Pride celebrations. We've seen a stronger focus on equity. And we've seen our community really come together overall. It's amazing what representation does. When you know the people that are in these roles of authority, these leadership roles in our community, you feel more connected and that you can actually enact that change. And that's what we're seeing right there on the ground.
Yet, there are only 10 out trans lawmakers across the country serving in their respective state legislatures. You are the only in Vermont. So what that tells me is there are still significant barriers in terms of trans people seeking public office. What are some of those barriers?
Well, I would say the political rhetoric that we're seeing is really one of the major barriers for trans people. When we are being ostracized and told that we are a part of this nation's problems, it does not encourage us or show us that there is a pathway forward to leadership. And yet, I think what the 10 of us strong across the nation are showing is that we are those leaders, and that we are not just leaders on LGBTQ issues. And that's the one that I really want to hit home, is that representation is not just focusing on this one community, because we contain so many more identities. But it's showing that folks who have marginalized experiences and have accessed these systems in different ways or have seen the barriers that others have not, it allows for a more nuanced conversation at this table and being able to make those decisions, rather than just testifying and offering that feedback and hoping that your leaders can understand or empathize with the experiences that you have.
Have you felt welcomed by your fellow representatives in the Vermont House from all corners of Vermont?
I can happily say yes. It is something that is really beautiful about serving here in Vermont, is that we're an interconnected community. And so, though for a majority of my colleagues, I was the first trans person that they had met, I think there's also a piece of being open and willing to have that dialogue. Sure, has it been challenging? Absolutely. Have people messed up my pronouns? Yes. But I think the difference here is that I'm able to say that they messed up my pronouns, that there has never been an attack from folks within that legislature on me personally. I cannot say that all of my colleagues are supportive of the LGBTQ community, or that they have not done attacks on the LGBTQ community. So there's still a learning curve, and there's a lot of work to be done in educating and understanding the impacts of our words, especially as leaders. But I will say, as a reception and being there in the State House, I have not had any backlash and have actually been welcomed with warm, open arms.
Finally, while in LGBTQ+ History Month we do tend to look back on history, we also have to look forward. Are you fundamentally optimistic about the future of Vermont when it comes to becoming, as the governor has asked us repeatedly to do, to become a more welcoming place for all people?
I would say so. And from a legislative perspective, we are putting those laws in place that are saying, we see you, we honor you, and we want to protect you. I see us as that beacon of hope across the nation of what can and should be done from a legislative perspective. Though, when I think of what we need to do to secure and really get young folks into the state of Vermont, there is so much more that we need to do. And I don't see that in an LGBTQ light in particular, but recognizing that our next generation has an increasing awareness and increasing numbers of LGBTQ people, I think we can both focus on those protections and how we are supporting young Vermonters and recruiting more young people to come and settle down right here in Vermont.
Representative Taylor Small, thanks for being with us on NBC5 In Depth.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ahead on NBC5 In Depth, a focus on the next generation this LGBTQ+ History Month. Stay with us. A new initiative aims to combat bullying and harassment in schools. The 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey showed LGBTQ+ kids were twice as likely to experience bullying as their straight, cisgender classmates. Now, more than a dozen organizations have teamed up to launch Narratives for Change to collect stories about bullying. The coalition wants to hear from students and families and use those stories to craft a report for the Education Agency. You can take the survey on the website on your screen. Meantime, the Champlain Valley School District has officially changed rules around pronouns and names. The old policies said students should be called by the names and pronouns consistent with how they identify. But the wording of the district's new rules says students will be called by those names and pronouns. The superintendent says he is proud to strengthen the wording of the policies. Finally, October started with a big announcement from Outright Vermont. The nonprofit's annual fire truck pull fundraiser hauled in $215,000, smashing its $200,000 goal. It's money that'll support Outright's programming aimed at ensuring safe, supportive, and joyful communities for LGBTQ+ kids so they can become future LGBTQ+ history makers. Thanks for being with us for this Project Community Focus on LGBTQ+ History Month. We'll see you next Sunday morning on NBC5 In Depth.